A Christmas Carol is one of the world's most iconic literary works, and like most things, the version of it with the Muppets is the best one.
Thank you for making me a part of this.
Its presence reigns so large in culture that I don't feel the need to summarize the original story. I did write one out, but I deleted it because it felt unnecessary. It is a reputation that is well earned. I did reread it in preparation for this video, which I now realize I didn't have to do, but I did cry. Even if somehow you've never seen a direct adaptation of A Christmas Carol, you've at least seen something riffing on it conceptually. In fact, if you search the name of a popular franchise followed by A Christmas Carol, there's a pretty high chance that you'll find something. And The Blue Blur is no exception to this, having not one, not two, but 3 adaptations of the Dickens tale, all focusing around the franchise's authoritarian antagonist, Dr. Robotnik. Or, Eggman, all of which being fairly different takes on the concept. That's right, very fittingly, we will be haunted by the 3 spirits of these adaptations. Expect the first when the ring tolls 1. Huh, that was fast. Our first frightful phantasm is that of the Archie Sonic comics, which gave us Sonic's Christmas Carol by Angelo De Cesare all the way back in issue 6. That's right, the pre-Ken days. Sonic also notes that out of all Christmas Carol adaptations, this one is the fastest. We'll see. This was an interesting time for the comics, as it hadn't quite transitioned to the more dramatic stories we're all familiar with today. In fact, despite the Robotnik design and the book's core cast, you could argue at this point it has more in common stylistically with Adventures of Sonic the Hedgehog, with its focus on gags. Their Christmas Carol adaptation is no different. Comedy is very subjective, and some of it does work for me. Man is literally pinching pennies, and some of it confuses me. Wouldn't renting a hat be more expensive? So we'll focus on what I think is interesting about this story, and I won't spend time evaluating every joke. Our story begins with Rotor Cratchit asking for some time off for Christmas from his boss, Scrooge Robotnik. While the miser first complains about how it will impact the efficiency of changing everyone on Mobius into a robot, he eventually relents. But only after cutting Rotor's 5-minute lunch down to 1 minute to make up for the lost time. Rotor wishes him a Merry Christmas, to which Scrooge responds, "Bah humbot." While at home, Scrooge is visited by the ghost of his old partner, Jacob Snarley. Fun fact, this is Snively's first appearance in the comic. It's also kind of funny to cast him as Jacob Marley when Scrooge does have a nephew, though I guess Snively is nowhere near as joyful as Fred. The nephew character is completely removed from the story this time around. Snarley warns Scrooge of his fate, that after spending his life turning living beings into robots, he has been punished for his misdeeds, having to spend eternity as a TV ghost. And he warns Scrooge this fate could be his, and that to make him change his evil ways, tonight he will be visited by 3 spirits. Sonic plays the ghost of Christmas past, or past, present, and future. The past segment is probably the most interesting, as it depicts Sonic and Robotnik as children being raised by Uncle Chuck. This might seem out of nowhere, but for a very small period of time, Robotnik and Sonic being orphans that Uncle Chuck took in was used a couple times as an origin story, both in the Trolls Associates novels and in issue 3 of the Sonic miniseries that predated the core Archie book. I'm not a fan of this origin. The age gap isn't quite right. The miniseries sort of indicates that Sonic and Robotnik would be around the same age, and even in the novel, which has Robotnik older, he's only 23, which doesn't seem right. I think this is the last time this origin gets brought up. The past has Sonic prevent the young Robotnik from ruining Uncle Chuck's Christmas tree, while in the present we see Scrooge has mailed a bomb to Rotor Cratchit and his family of freedom fighters. They don't assign the rest of the cast characters, but if I had to guess, Sally's Emily, Tails is Tiny Tim, Bunny is Martha or Belinda, Sonic is Peter, and I think Uncle Chuck is still just Uncle Chuck. Peter Sonic realizes it's a bomb and sends the package back. Next, we move on to the comic's future segment, which again I think is pretty interesting. Scrooge is transported to a completely desolated world, only populated by aged versions of himself and the freedom fighters. When the Sonic of Christmas Future points out that even if he wins, he'd be ruling over nothing, he almost gets through to Scrooge. But just as he's about to reach his epiphany, Scrooge looks over to see his future self finally winning, taking out the freedom fighters with his giant robot, with even Sonic being too old to do anything. The sight of his eventual victory is just enough to keep the old miser on his current path. Though before victory can be celebrated, the package that was returned finally arrives, resulting in both Scrooge and his future counterpart being blown up. The explosion wakes Sonic from this dream, just in time for the last page of the story, where he wishes all the readers a happy holidays. Now, what do I think is interesting about this story's future segment? Well, it sort of foreshadows something that happens 6 years later. While the Robotnik that appears in this story essentially bites the dust in issue 50, issue 75 would have the Freedom Fighters come face to face with an alternate reality Robotnik, who becomes the antagonist for the rest of the comic. This Robotnik had destroyed a future version of Sonic and Friends using part of a giant robot, and only after winning did he realize how empty his life was now, causing him to seek out this universe's Sonic so they can continue fighting. This issue also ends with him getting blown up.
It's like poetry, so if they rhyme.
Do I think this is intentional? No. But I think it's a little interesting parallel that I don't think I've ever seen anyone bring up. But what do I think of this adaptation overall? It's serviceable. If the humor works for the reader, I could see it being a fun read. Really, it's hit or miss for me, and my opinion is the same as a lot of the early comic. It's a neat relic of its time where there were a lot of conflicting tones and approaches to Sonic. It's not without merit, but it might not scratch the itch you're looking for a Sonic Christmas Carol. Come in and know them better, man. Them in this case being the Fleetway comics. I love these comics, and I do think they're far more than just the place Fleetway Supersonic came from. I like him. There's other stuff. That being said, you kinda gotta have an open mind to different interpretations of the Sonic lore if you're gonna read this. It definitely does its own thing that might abhor a purist, but I like what it does. In 1996, in issue 93, writer Lou Stringer gave us Sonic's World, Season of Goodwill. Remember how Sonic said the last Christmas Carol adaptation was the fastest? So that story got to be told over the course of 13 pages. It's sharing space in the book with a Spinball adaptation and a one-page gag comic. Well, Fleetway has to tell this story over the space of 5 pages, sharing the book with 3 other full stories. Spider-Man's here. Let's not worry about that right now. Also, while Archie decided to do a comedic take on A Christmas Carol, comparatively, Fleetway plays their version seriously. So with its truncated story length, how do they manage this? By condensing the story to its bare necessities. An older angry man who clearly doesn't care that much for Christmas has a supernatural experience that attempts to turn him into a good person, reminding him of his past, showing him the reality of the present, and warning him of the future. I'm far from the only one that's identified this as a take on A Christmas Carol, so I don't think I'm reaching. So let's check it out. On Christmas Day, a good portion of the Freedom Fighters are celebrating Christmas in Techno the Canary's underground lab. However, hidden away in a base of his own, Robotnik looks on in disgust at everyone celebrating, and decides to unleash his orbital weapon, and plans to melt all the snow, causing a large flood. Before he can do so, however, he's interrupted by a bright light. When the light fades, a figure appears to him, one that identifies himself as Father Christmas. You know, Santa. Robotnik calls in his guards to attack, though Claus reveals that he can only be seen by living beings, causing the Doctor to attempt to attack the intruder, only to discover that he can't touch him either. Father Christmas attempts to remind Robotnik of who he once was, the kindly Dr. Avi Kintobor, made evil by a lab accident that transformed him. The old man offers him a chance to do a good deed, to destroy the weapon before he ever has a chance to use it. The Doctor, seeing no benefit, refuses. Fortunately, the delay caused by St. Nick allows one of the Freedom Fighters, Short Fuse, to locate and destroy the device. As Father Christmas leaves, he gives Robotnik a warning that if he continues acting this way, his empire will fall in mere months. Robotnik ignores him, saying that he likes being evil and enjoys his power. But as he sits alone in his fortress, only surrounded by robots for company, he realizes he has no friends on Christmas Day. Despite its short length, I really like this story. I think the use of Father Christmas is a really neat unification of 2 disparate pieces of holiday mythology, and I really like how they treat him here. He isn't a typical Santa, he's more of a foreboding spirit, almost like a wizard mixed with the ghost of Christmas yet to come. And while the Archie story was a dream, I think it's cool the story is set within the comic's main continuity, because it kinda ends up being important. It serves as an important bit of foreshadowing. While Archie accidentally predicted its future, I think this is 100% intentional. As a mere 7 issues later, Robotnik's empire would fall in issue 100's story The Final Victory, which was co-written by both this story's writer Lou Stringer and other comic regular Nigel Kitching. This one is really solid. You need a little bit of knowledge of this comic's continuity in order to fully enjoy it, but I think it's worth it. Behold, a solemn phantom, draped and hooded, coming like a mist along the ground toward you. Oh, it's Sega. That's right, rather than coming from a licensee, the last story comes from Sega themselves. Uploaded on the Sonic YouTube channel as an Eggman Carol on December 24th, 2020. 2020 was an interesting time for Sonic. The first Sonic movie came out, which regardless of your feelings on the films, have been a net positive for the franchise. IDW wrapped up probably their most popular arc and rolled directly into my favorite one. At the same time, the most recent mainline title was Sonic Forces, which, you know, a fair amount of people thought was lacking. I thought it was okay. Really, this was a period of change for the franchise. And while it was definitely more focused, it's not completely unlike how the franchise was finding its footing back in 1993. And just so happens we're back to a slightly more comedic take on A Christmas Carol.
It's like poetry, so if they rhyme.
This one is more or less a straight retelling of A Christmas Carol, Eggman of course in the role of Scrooge, Orbot is the Bob Cratchit equivalent, and Cubot is Fred, inviting Eggman to a Christmas party, to which he roughly responds, "Bah Motorbug." I think I like that more than Bah Humbot, just because it caught me off guard. Sonic is in the equivalent role of Jacob Marley, being the one to warn Eggman of the three impending spirits, with Knuckles as the ghost of Christmas past, Tails as the ghost of Christmas present, and Silver as the ghost of Christmas yet to come. The past segment I do want to talk about, as they watch through what is described as Eggman's childhood and young adult days, so that Knuckles can show him he wasn't always like this. Two of the memories, though, are building Metal Sonic and being on a ride from his theme park from Sonic Colors. I think he was like that during those times. Though the one of him looking up to his grandfather is something interesting to focus on. And had this come out 2 years later, there's even more about his childhood that could have been explored thanks to the audio logs in Sonic Frontiers. I think this is a good example of the space the franchise was in at the time, that there was a desire to do a little bit more with these characters, but they weren't quite ready to go full on in that direction. The present is kinda standard for a Christmas Carol adaptation. We see Eggman's Badniks finding joy in what little they have, and we see Cubot's Christmas party, which Eggman now wants to join in on. Future is like that as well, except for a cameo from a certain descendant of Eggman we don't really get to see that often. I can't say his name because then the comments will be about one thing only. While at first it seems like Eggman may have learned his lesson, he quickly reveals his new plan is to collect the 7 Chaos Emeralds to fight off the 3 spirits attempting to make him a better person. He tells Orbot to get lost so he can plan in peace. And as Orbot rounds the corner, it's revealed the whole thing was a trick. And while they did fail in their plan, Orbot at least doesn't have to work on Christmas now. While this short might be a little uneven, I think if it's all viewed as setup for the punchline at the end, it's fairly solid. No foreshadowing in this one, I don't think. I doubt we're killing off Eggman, though I won't say it's impossible to see his descendant in some form again, however unlikely I think that is. It's only a 5-minute watch, check it out. Every time I brought up this project to someone, they said the same thing. Why are there so many? And you know, there's some obvious things, different audiences, books going out of print, but what really becomes clear when you look at all these is how quickly Sonic can change as a franchise. While Archie and Fleetway were separate, Fleetway started out a bit more comedy focused too. So even in the 3 years that passed between these two stories, even when adapting the same Charles Dickens story, they're pretty unrecognizable from one another. And during research, these adaptations never felt repetitive. And honestly, that's a very good thing. It shows how pliable Sonic is as a series, that it is a space where different creators have gotten to share very different visions. Heck, these may be the official Christmas Carol adaptations, but there's plenty of fan ones out there too, that don't focus on Eggman, and are still so different from these. We all have a favorite time period for the series, parts we're nostalgic for, but this keeps me looking forward to what comes next. To paraphrase a rich guy who got haunted by ghosts, we should live in the past, the present, and the future. I reread the story, I'm gonna get in all the quotes I can. The older stuff, regardless of if it's gonna get referred to again, has value in that it was someone's creative endeavor. That's why I like talking about it every day. And while the present is of course a different Sonic than the one I grew up with, I still really love the series. And I openly accept that the Sonic of the future is going to be even more different. I don't think I'm going to stop enjoying this franchise, but even if somehow I do, I'm happy to know it's probably going to keep on going with or without me, changing just like the world around us. I guess we'll reconvene on this topic in about 10 years when we're due for another official adaptation. I think Sage should be one of the ghosts. Oh, I guess I should rank these? Season of Goodwill is my favorite, and I like an Eggman Carol and Sonic's Christmas Carol about the same, but I think an Eggman Carol is slightly better. And before anyone types this comment out, no, posters do not count as adaptations. Thank you so much for watching. I wanted to make sure I got this done before Christmas, and I hope all the all-nighters were worth it. If you want to support me, you can like, comment, subscribe, or support me on Patreon. Special shout out to my $5 patrons, Ned Rex, Nate DM990, Diddly Do, and Queer Kaiju. See y'all in the next video.